Hi, I'm Kesenya from Guiding Star with Kesenya. Thanks so much for joining me for this special series all about Saturn and his transits through each of the houses in the horoscope. Some of you might be familiar with a video I've done in the past all about Saturn and his transit through the sign of Aquarius and where that's going to fall for each sign. This video series may be a little similar to that. We might cover similar topics of information. But there will also be more depth in this series, so I thank you for joining me for this ongoing series throughout this autumn. Can I also just say I would be so honoured if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel and support the work that I do here in growing the knowledge of astrology throughout Australia and the world. So what is Saturn, first of all? Saturn is the seventh planet out from the Sun, when we include the Sun in this counting astrologically. Saturn is also the last of the visible planets that we can see with the naked eye in the sky at night. Beyond Saturn, to see Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, we need a telescope. And so it's considered in ancient astrology that Saturn is the planet that actually the final frontier, if you like, that correlates to our visible earthly reality, the manifested reality on planet Earth in this incarnation. Beyond that, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto all have correlations to our inner self, our psyche, our past lives, our wounds, our personal issues, and the way we think about things and the way we integrate things into our lives. So they are very psychological energies, whereas up until Saturn, we have both psychological things happening from those planets, but also material manifestation happening from the planets that we can see. It's an old Hermetic principle, which is called as above, so below, as without, so within. What we see in the sky above us is reflected in our reality on the earth. And the old principle taken further is also what is going on energetically within our soul and our psyche is also reflected on the outer in our earthly life as well. So Saturn, being the furthest planet out as a material planet, as a planet of manifestation, governs most strongly what happens on planet Earth, and for our individual journeys as well. And the reason that is that the further out you go with the planets, the more impact that they have on our lives here on Earth. That might seem a little bit odd. We might ordinarily think that the closer the planet, the greater impact it would have on us. Therefore, Venus should be the most impactful planet of all. But that's not the case in astrology, and it's to do with the time and the speed of a particular planet. With Saturn, its movement is so slow that the energy has time to build and therefore really pack a punch. Where Venus, or the moon if you want, for example, as well, they whiz around the astrological chart very quickly. The moon goes around in 1 month. Venus goes around in approximately, give or take, a year, depending on whether she goes retrograde or not. But Saturn takes 30 years to do a cycle of the astrological chart, and therefore the energy has a lot of time to accumulate in one spot, and therefore we feel the impact most strongly. Saturn, as with all planets, has things that it rules, things that it governs in this earthly reality that we experience. Saturn rules over structures, organizations, hierarchies, governments, regulations and rules. Saturn is also known as Father Time. He governs time here on planet Earth. There are some realms where time doesn't matter. Time is immaterial. But here on planet Earth, we are governed by time as a spirit being manifested into human material form. We are governed by time, and Saturn is the master of time. Saturn also represents things like responsibility, duty, hard work, maturity, perseverance, and endurance in life. These are all actually really great things, and we tend to receive the blessing of these Saturn positive qualities when we start getting into our mid to late 30s. That's when Saturn matures in Vedic astrology, he reaches his maturation. And when he reaches his maturation, essentially, we learn how to carry our burdens in life. And everyone at some point needs to learn that lesson. Certainly by the age of 35, 36, when Saturn matures, we step into our full adulthood. We're no longer young adults, we're no longer children, we have fully reached maturity, and hopefully, if we're manifesting at a high level, we've learned how to carry our burdens. Saturn represents structures, as I said, but also traditions. He is the master of the legacy we want to leave behind as well. He has a connection with the 10th house in astrology, which is all about legacy that we want to leave for those who come after us. He also has a connection to authority figures and those in authority over us. Saturn, on the more negative side of his energy, rules restriction and blockage, fear, holding things back, keeping things from us, and starving us of the things we like, but also equally starving us of the negative things in life if he is making a particular aspect in our natal chart. In astrology, Saturn is the ruler of two signs traditionally. The sign of Capricorn mainly, and then in traditional astrology, the sign of Aquarius. In modern astrology, Uranus is considered to be the ruler of the sign of Aquarius. But in traditional astrology, Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn and Aquarius. In archetypal astrology, Saturn is seen as the boss figure, the CEO. Because I like things to be a bit lighter and a bit more fun, I kind of envisage Saturn as kind of the head of control in the Get Smart series. If you're familiar with the chief, he's managing all these bumbling idiots all around him trying to catch the bad guys. And here is the chief just trying to keep everything under control, managed, well organized, well structured, and adhering to what needs to happen and the rules and principles of control in the series Get Smart. But he's still likable. A lot of people will paint Saturn to be the boogeyman of the horoscope. He's out to get you. He makes life tough. He's negative. And certainly some streams of astrology see him as the great malefic. I kind of liken him instead to the great father figure in the sky. If you imagine a father who's, his daughter or son is 16 and they're about to go out to a party, and dad, the father figure, is sitting there, and as they run out the front door and says, "Hang on, what time are you going to be home? Where are you going? I want the phone number of the place where you're going to be. Are there going to be any other adults at the party? You've got to do things properly, by the book. There's no being silly, and I want you home by 10 o'clock. And the children are like, "Oh, Dad." But Dad's strict and firm and doesn't budge an inch. He sets boundaries. He says, "No way, home by 10 o'clock. You're not going to be one of those children who's out running around the streets at all hours of the night, getting up to no good." So he is this protector, father figure energy, authority figure energy in the horoscope. Now, sometimes we see people manifesting Saturn in a very negative way. They are the authority figure with abuse and violence and control. Now, often that would indicate a connection with Mars in a chart if that's how it was playing out. But then there are other people who manifest beautiful Saturn energy that's benevolent. That is, lots of boundaries, lots of regulations and rules, but it's for your greater good. It's for your upliftment. It's for the betterment of yourself, society, humanity, whatever. So there are many ways Saturn can manifest, but he is always the energy of this protector father figure. Even in karmic astrology, Saturn represents our fears that we have from previous incarnations. For example, if you happen to fall off, and many people who've had readings with me will have heard this analogy, if you happen to in a past life fall off the Grand Canyon to plummet to your death, and then you reincarnate and you've got this fear of heights you can't explain, that's Saturn putting protective boundaries of fear in place so that you don't go and fall off the Grand Canyon again and plummet to your death in the next life. So he is very much about our psychic protection or karmic protection, and sometimes people see him as a representation of karmic blockage, based on the hurts and the wounds and the fears we've experienced in past incarnations. According to the reading I've done, Saturn rules the gemstone qualities of obsidian, also tourmaline and hematite, the heavy black stones that are, in the case of tourmaline especially, particularly good at absorbing energy. Saturn also correlates to the color brown, which is why for this series I'm dressing in very autumnal tones of brown. And as a ruler of the earth sign of Capricorn, Saturn is a very earthy type of planet, and it has a lot of earth energy about him. And so one of the remedies that we can offer for any Saturn troubled times is to be in nature or to walk barefoot on the earth. Saturn also rules rocks and gravelly soil and rocky places. Isolated places do come under Saturn's governance occasionally as well. So to be in those places is actually to be in a Saturnian environment, or to live in a garden full of rocks or a house that's made of stone is a very Saturnian environment to live in. Saturn also governs things like minimalism and restraint and restriction. If we were to have Saturn sitting permanently in our first house, then we might find that our body was restricted in some way, either through our size is restricted, or our height. So either our outward expression or our upward expression would be restricted. Saturn would be affecting our body in that way. So he rules restriction and restraint. So that's a little, in a nutshell, picture of what Saturn as a planet represents. Now we're going to dive into what it means to have Saturn transiting through the houses. But first, let's start with an explanation of how to assess where Saturn is according to whole sign astrology by transit. So when Saturn transits the third house of our chart in whole sign astrology, basically it is 3 signs from our rising signs. So you really need to know what your rising sign is. If you want to, you can go to a website like www.astro.com and plug in your birth details to find out what your rising sign is, but you need a very accurate birth time to get it right. But for example, if you let's say you do know what your rising sign is, we're going to use where Saturn currently is right now to sort of illustrate how this works. If you are, say, at the moment, when I'm recording this, if you are Sagittarius rising, Saturn is just about to move into the sign of Aquarius. And when it does, it will be, get in there. When he does, he will be 3 signs from your rising sign. If this is your rising sign, Sagittarius, this is your first house, Capricorn is your second house, and Aquarius is your third house. And if that is where Saturn is currently transiting through your third house, then this is the video for you. Now, I also need to point out, if you happen to be watching this in a few years' time, then Saturn will not be in the sign of Aquarius. Saturn might be in Pisces or Aries or Taurus or somewhere completely different. So you're really going to need to know where Saturn currently is as you are watching this video, the time you're watching this video. And you can do that by checking up with a piece of software such as planetwatcher.com, www.planetwatcher.com. It shows where all the planets currently are at that moment in time when you Google that website. So currently Saturn is in the sign of Aquarius. And so if you're Sagittarius rising, this is the sign for you. This is the video for you. But let's say you're watching this in, a few years' time and Saturn happens to be transiting through the sign of Aries. You jump on planetwatcher.com, you look up and see that Saturn's in the sign of Aries. And, this is a video all about Saturn moving through the third house. So Aquarius rising would be the video that applies to. I hope that makes sense. If in a few years' time you're watching this and Saturn's in Aries, the rising sign for third house Aries is Aquarius. I hope I haven't made that too confusing. So if you, back to where we were, if you are Sagittarius rising, Saturn's move into the sign of Aquarius is going to be your third house. And you'll have to work that out if you're watching this further on down the track from when I'm recording in 2020. Now, in the Hindu astrology, the third house has to do with willpower. The third house also has to do with energy that we have to accomplish our daily tasks and the things we undertake, and the capacity to fulfill our desires, our daily desires. So we're looking at these energies when we're looking at Saturn's transit through the third house with the lens of the Vedic or Hindu system of analysis. When Saturn transits the third house, it can be very difficult to accomplish daily goals and simple tasks because Saturn restricts, Saturn blocks. We feel like we're getting nowhere no matter what we do when we've got Saturn transiting the third house. I do want to point out that this is the Hindu. I'm giving you firstly the Hindu approach, and then I'll talk about the Western astrology approach, and you can make a decision about which one feels right for you, which one fits the bill with what you are experiencing with the current Saturn transit. So we feel like we're getting nowhere no matter what we do when we've got Saturn restricting and blocking this realm of our chart that has to do with our daily activities and our ability to assert our willpower and our energy to fulfill our daily desires. So the lesson here is to learn to economize. Saturn rules economizing, and so our energy is directed into our daily life, and that's where we're going to need to learn to economize our energy. Learning not to waste our energy on minor unimportant things is very important during Saturn's transit of the third house. Now, by aspect in Vedic astrology, Saturn will be triggering the 5th house, the 9th house, and the 12th house. So by aspect, the 5th house, which will be Aries, Leo, and Scorpio, the 12th house, if you happen to be Sagittarius rising. If you're a different rising sign and you're watching this in a few years' time, then the actual signs will be different, but the location in the chart will be the same. So when Saturn makes an aspect to the 5th house, it can bring restrictions and blockage with regard to children, pregnancy, and investments. Because in Vedic astrology, that's what the 5th house correlates to. So there might be difficulty getting pregnant during the next 2.5 years of your Saturn's transit through the sign of Aquarius, or for most of us watching this video, the 3rd house. So blockages with getting pregnant, difficulties with children, maybe the children are running amok, or you feel disconnected from your children in some way, or they're distanced from you by, maybe having to go to boarding school or something like that, where there's some challenges, restrictions and blockages with regard to your relationship with your children. Luck is seen by the 9th house up here. That's 9 houses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 houses from the rising sign is the 9th house, and your luck can be lessened. Saturn's aspect there just restricts it, blocks it, holds it back, makes you wait, makes you endure and persevere and work hard, and luck just doesn't fall into your lap quite as much with this transit of Saturn through the 3rd house aspecting the 9th. There can be problems with travel as well over the next 2.5 to 3 years with Saturn's journey through this realm of the chart aspecting the 9th. There can be problems with religion. There can be problems with inspirational figures. You might be disappointed by a guru in some way, or some sort of religious idea might cause fear in your life. Saturn rules fear. So there can be fear that comes from religious experiences, or more religious, not spiritual experiences. The ability to undertake higher learning can also be a bit inhibited. If you do it, you might find it a really hard slog. It's not the, walk in the park that you thought high school was. Suddenly university is really difficult, and it can be a lot more challenging and really stretch you and cause you to sort of have to persevere and endure a lot more than you might otherwise have had to. After this period of time, this 2.5 to 3 year period is over, things can lighten up in that realm. So, it's up to you. You might like to push yourself to persevere and endure, or you might choose to have a couple of gap years where you earn some money before you go to university, or undertake some sort of higher learning at any stage of life. And the aspect to the 12th house can bring problems with sort of overseas connections, overseas investments, overseas collaborations, and that sort of thing. Extra debts, extra expenses when we have Saturn aspecting the 12th house like this. You're being called to develop a greater discipline in life with this transit of Saturn, and you're called to achieve enlightenment and personal liberation by focusing within when Saturn is making an aspect to the 12th house. So these will be the themes that may play out for you through the Hindu lens on Saturn's transit through the 3rd house. Now let's take a look at the Western influence of Saturn in the 3rd house, and we tend to go into a deep dive with learning when Saturn's in the 3rd house, because in Western astrology the 3rd house has to do with our talents, our abilities, the skills of our hands, and our ability to learn, to communicate, to write, to speak. So you're going to do a deep dive into more learning, more skill development, putting your hard work and effort into those things for the benefit of your earthly reality when Saturn moves through the 3rd house. Saturn is actually quite beneficial in Western astrology in the 3rd house, because what he's doing is bringing you a greater focus, and that in the house of skills development and learning and writing and speaking can be very helpful. Your concentration is enhanced with this transit of Saturn to the 3rd house. It comes more easily, especially your ability to concentrate on learning new skills for a career. So it's a great time for researching, it's a great time for investigating and analyzing things, getting into the nitty-gritty with Saturn's thoroughness. So deep thinking is good now. You know, if you have to do some deep thinking for pondering something, or researching, or looking internally at yourself also. Serious thought. You'll have a serious approach to life. Your thinking will take on more Saturnian nature, which is to be serious, to be diligent, to be persevering. And so the way you think will be along those lines, a more stoic way of thinking and perceiving now when Saturn's in the 3rd house. Watch out though for depressed thinking, because Saturn does have connections to depression, and he can bring a lot of heaviness to our thought life when he's in the 3rd house. So we can feel a little bit more depressed. We can think at a sort of a lower manifested level, you know, go down that rabbit hole of poor me, you know, I'm a victim, pity party, that kind of, you know, way of thinking about life can come on when Saturn moves through the 3rd house. I'd encourage you to alleviate that. Take time out to utilize your talents and your skill sets in some way, maybe for a hobby. This is also the house of playing games. So to alleviate the sort of the negative thinking of Saturn, maybe, you know, get the kids out and play Boulder Dash one night, or invite some friends over and have a laugh over Cards Against Humanity or something. But, you know, playing games, keep your thinking from negativity, from criticism, by keeping things light, as light as you can in this time of serious, heavy thinking. Keep things a bit more buoyant as much as you're able to, and focus your thoughts. Learn to control your mind. Focus your thoughts on the positive, rather than, you know, the first sign of yourself going down that negative rabbit hole with your thoughts, pull yourself up. Get some affirmations by Louise Hay and start practicing them. Pin them up all around the house and utilize them. Use positive thinking as a balancing or an alleviation of Saturn's energy in the 3rd house. Now, oddly enough, in this, Saturn is usually the energy of restriction and blockage, but in the 3rd house, oddly enough, Saturn actually makes us want to network more. To, you know, we feel more driven to put effort into connecting and partnering and communicating with other people. So there might be lots more duties and responsibilities with our neighbours, with our networks, with our siblings, with our extended relatives, all of which are ruled by the 3rd house. So we might have more duties and responsibilities. We might have to work harder to help and support those people in our life. But we have this desire to connect more, which is really, really nice. So a desire to communicate, especially with words, you know, talking, speaking, writing. So when we do this with people, when we're communicating and not so much collaborating, but communicating with and networking with people, When Saturn is in the third house, we're doing it not so much because we love it and we're social beings and we want to have a natter and over a cup of coffee and, chin wag and stuff. It's not for the love of it. We're doing it because we feel it's a necessity to do so. That's the motivation with Saturn in the third house. It's necessary for us to create connections, create networks, to collaborate communicatively with somebody else in order to support our life purpose, in order to support our life direction. So there is a method in this madness. There is purpose in Saturn's desire in the third house to network and connect. This is a good time to review attitudes as well, how we view things and how we think about things. Third house energy. Saturn represents the energy of restructuring, so you're going to need to review and restructure your attitudes, your thoughts about things, and the way you think about life. It's going to come instigated from within you, but it may also be a response to outward circumstances that cause you to reassess. But the good thing is you can be a little bit more detached about your mental processing now. Saturn is detachment. So you can be a bit more detached about your mental processing now, and you can assess what you need in order to change your perspective on life, in order to live a more successful life. If you need to change your attitude around wealth, if you need to change your attitude towards friends, if you need to change your attitudes towards work, this is a great transit for doing that can ultimately bring you more benefit in the long term. You can then take action regarding what you have to do to get there, to achieve what you want. Change the attitudes, change the actions, change the talents and skills that you need in order to have the success or the friendships or the love life or whatever it is that you want. So your attitudes will be reviewed, and it can actually be a really helpful process to take you where you need to go. So lots of learning opportunities can now come your way with Saturn moving through the third house as well. You'll get powerful insights. You'll get improvement in your mental capacity and your mental processes. I'm not saying that you're going to be able to sort of tune in psychically to ways of thinking. Saturn's not like that. Saturn's very much earth energy, grounded energy, focused on the here and now and the present earthly reality, not up there in the ether like Neptune or even Jupiter. Much more practical and grounded, but you'll be thinking in those ways: practical, grounded, realistic. How can I put this to good use for my life? Kind of approach to things, mental thoughts about things. So when you get powerful insights, it's not going to be powerful psychic insights. It'll be a powerful insight. You know what? I could utilize that in my business if I could produce that, and then I could sell that, and you'll have a practical approach to thinking about life and about things. And that's going to help you in years to come, because you'll be able to restructure how you think about things, and that will set you up for the future. And by the time this transit comes to a close, your thinking processes will have changed completely. You'll have a more mature way of looking at life, which is great. We all could use that. I like it when I see, if I look back at my diary entry from a year ago to what I would have written now. I'm like, my God, I've come so far. Thank you. I'm grateful to see my mental processes maturing and growing. You'll probably think in more Saturnian ways, which can be very helpful and practical on Earth when we think Saturnianly, with stoicism, we think dutifully, we think maturely and responsibly. These are actually gifts to help make our earthly life more flowing. No, not more flowing, more bearable, more harmonious, more just work for us basically. And so you'll have this detached approach. You'll be more objective in the way you think about things, and it's going to actually make your world perceptions, funnily enough, more flexible. When we're a bit more detached and not so clinging to our old outworn attitudes and beliefs that, and then we're rigid, we don't flow. Well, Saturn making us more objective and more detached can actually make our approach to life and living a little bit more flexible and flowing, which is a really good thing. So some ways to support yourself through this transit of the third house. I would encourage you, as I mentioned a little moment ago, to invest in playtime. This is a game playing house. It's not necessarily the house of fun, but it's the house of playing. And so, games, team sports, or even just sports in general you could undertake, as long as you find it playful. You might like to play tennis. You might like to play board games with your kids if they'll get off their tech for long enough. You might like to play in the garden. Digging in the garden might be a form of play for you. But the more playful things you undertake, get out the chessboard, or if you're as old as me, play computer games like Pong on the computer, because that's how old I am. Playing computer games does fit the bill too. So actually I do love Sim City, the one where you create towns and everything. Is the old town planner in me coming out there. But game playing is a wonderful way to navigate through these the Saturn transit of the third house. Avoid worrying as much as possible. That's one of the rabbit holes your thinking can go down, where you worry all the time. So instead, focus on developing your concentration skills and the ability to control your mind. Saturn is he isn't the planet of control, but there are controlling elements to Saturn. So practicing meditation, practicing thought control. Really, Saturn's a planet of authority. You want authority over your thoughts now. And the more exercises you can do to help you get authority over your thinking, the greater benefit you're going to get through this transit. So playtime, invest in that just to keep things light, keep things buoyant. Practice authority over your thinking. Lots of spiritual practices tap into that. Buddhism is a great one for practicing thought control and authority over your thinking, but there are also other methods as well out there too. And take care of your lungs and nervous system. This is because the third house correlates to those things, and they will be vulnerable for the next 2.5 to 3 years with Saturn moving through the third house. So maybe you might like to enroll in some sort of breath work course and practice deep breathing. Take care in wintertime and change of seasons when you're susceptible to colds, because your lungs can be affected with Saturn in the third house. And just act sensibly. Lots of hygiene and breathing exercises and things like that to keep your lungs at capacity. If you want, you can utilize this energy to perhaps give up things that are restricting or blocking you, such as cigarette smoking and things that might be affecting your lungs in some negative way. You can actually do some restructuring. Saturn is restructuring of how you are caring for your lungs, and restructuring your breathing processes can actually be supported during Saturn's transit here as well. It's not so much a transit that will break addictions, if cigarette smoking is an addiction, but it's more about restructuring for your benefit. And if there's a way you can restructure, you might have to put a lot of hard work and hard effort, nature of Saturn, into restructuring your life as it affects your lungs in some way, then it's worth doing. So I would encourage you in that. So that's really, in a nutshell, the nature of Saturn's transit through the third house. If my explanation of where Saturn currently is and whether it is your third house or not is too confusing for you, then do leave a comment in the comment section. Myself or someone else with a lot of astrological knowledge would be delighted to help you figure out if Saturn's transiting through your third house or not. Thank you and God bless.